Hey everybody, here is part 2, no preamble this time. Enjoy. We were talking a little bit about history earlier on. Now, when I read the Saturninus books, my mind kept going to Da Vinci. He reminded me, some of the characteristics reminded me of Da Vinci. He's a polymath, he can do a little bit of everything. Is that true, firstly? Did you kind of have that in the back of your mind? And
not really particularly. I think I got the idea for him. There was a Renaissance painter, I can't remember his name, I think he was a painter, who was convicted of murder.
Okay.
And I thought, how would it be if you had somebody who was an incredible genius, but was also had a criminal streak that overrode his genius.
Right.
And I thought, that made me think of Saturninus as a paradox.
Okay.
And since I must admit, I do enjoy writing a Saturninus because I can relate to him very direct. Quotation I incorporate in my books. I attribute to Saturninus, so he's a good shorthand.
He's in every book, I think,
yes.
that I've read so far, at least. I love seeing the little Easter egg.
Well, he has written the entire works of Nietzsche and Gilbert and Sullivan for a start, and Shakespeare, of course.
Right, yeah. I do love Saturninus because I've been rereading them as well. I often read them in between some of the longer books that I read. Fantasy books, they tend to be 500-600 pages these days. And because they're so short, they're just such a nice way to just be in this slightly crazy guy's head and just go on this ride for a while. I love it. Would you ever write a full-length novel with Saturninus as the central character?
I might do. I haven't come across a story big enough.
Right.
But I like to keep some things for novels and other things for novellas and short stories.
Yeah.
I've always tried. The most obvious thing is magic. I try and keep magic for the short, which is why the books I'm writing now, of course, are full of magic. But only because I said I wouldn't do it. Out
of all of the books that you've written so far, which one was the hardest book to write, and why was that?
I don't think any of them was particularly hard, or none of them was particularly easy. It's very different with the comic fantasies that I write under my own name.
Right.
They can get very, very difficult at times, and I get stuck. And generally speaking, the life cycle of one of the comic fantasies is that I write about 100 pages of it, get completely stuck, decide that there's no way I can make this work. I come back to it 3 years later and finish it. I don't think I remember being stuck in a K.J. Parker book. Probably just because they evolve in a different way. Right. Because they start with a hook and then the characters take over, and I plot out to the middle of a book, and then let the characters decide what's going to happen at the end. Because at the beginning of a book, I don't know the characters well enough to know how they're going to react at the end. Right. They have to make their own decision, which sounds pretentious, but it's been it's the only I can't plot a book all the way through, because I can only plot as far as the crisis, right? Because I don't know how the characters are going to behave in the crisis until I've worked through it with them.
Interesting. So you don't have the end in mind. You just have the kind of the forcing function, I guess, that makes the main character kind of have to do something, and then you kind of figure it out as you go along.
Yeah.
Interesting, that's very cool. And when you go through your writing process, I mean, what's that like? I'm just really curious as to how you set up your days. Do you wake up in the morning? Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person?
Both. I write from 8 till 10:30, and then from 9 o'clock to midnight. Which are the times of day when I can be fairly certain of not being disturbed.
Yeah.
I have to concentrate 100% when I'm writing, otherwise I just can't do it.
Yeah. So no music, nothing like that on in the background.
Oh,
yeah.
no.
Yeah.
That's about 2.5 hours is about as long as I can concentrate at that level all the time. And then I've got to stop, or nothing comes out the garbage.
Yeah.
And that's and I work every day, because if I miss a day, it is very difficult indeed to start again.
Yeah.
Apart from that, that's about all I can tell you about the mechanics of it. I can understand why some writers do things that way, because the boot up section of your day is obviously the most important.
Yeah.
And if you can create little rituals to help to get you started, then that really, I can see how important that would be, because that's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Once I find that particularly writing in the first person narrative, once I can get the character talking, then that's fine. All I have to do is be a sort of secretary.
Yeah.
And once you can get the characters talking to each other, then that's fine. I don't have to do anything after that.
That's so interesting. I'm curious, maybe go away from writing for a second. What do you do outside of writing? You know, when you have those days where you're maybe a bit stuck on an idea, what do you do to kind of reset and just kind of get away from it?
Writing is not the core of my life. It's the day or the morning and night job.
Right.
The core of my life is doing other things, basically having fun according to my definition of fun. I work a little small holding just up the road, and since we moved here, I've been able to achieve my ambition of having my own little blacksmith's forge. That's the sort of thing that I love doing. Those things, of course, sort of feed directly into my writing, because I then write about them, and I feel that I can write about farming. I can write about handicraft, because that's what I do.
When you write a book, so in the company you talk a lot about kind of military tactics. In the Folding Knife you talk a lot about the economy, and you talk a lot about just like commodities, buying and selling. I love that about that book in particular. How do you, when you're writing a book, do you have an idea of what kind of topic you're going to embed into the story, or does that kind of come naturally?
It arises out of the situation, and the situation arises out of the characters, and the characters arise out of one little hook. It's more a case of growing a character, like growing a culture, and then letting it loose in a situation, and seeing what the character wants to do.
Yeah.
That's why it's pointless for me to try and plot a book out to the end, because it may well get halfway and the character has no intention of doing what I want him to do.
Yeah.
And trying to force him to do that, it would make him unreal.
Yeah, it wouldn't feel authentic to the character. Let's move on to some of the more kind of thematic work that you kind of embed into your stories, because there's a lot of things that you talk about in each of your books, right? Savages, I think, for me, it talked a lot about kind of imperialism. The Folding Knife was really about leadership and about how sometimes we can be our own biggest enemy. I think Basso is kind of the victim of his own actions.
Yeah.
And then the company, there's a whole load of stuff in that book that we could unpack. When you're writing these books, does the thematic work kind of come as part of that process after the hook and after the characters, or do you think about that outside of it? Because it's so embedded into the story. Every
book I write is about something, but I don't. But it emerges in the process of writing and getting to know the characters what that something is. Once I know what it's about, then I can address it deliberately. Yeah. But I generally don't know what it's about until the characters tell me what they want it to be about. The idea I had, the original hook for Basso was first that little interaction at the start of the book of an arrogant upper class kid having and a policeman, and then the thought of the man who had it all and lost it all. And that was all that I started with.
Yeah.
And then, but because the character I had the character given to me, as it were, I never had any. I never had to stop and think what happens next, or what direction does he want to go, because it was inevitable.
Yeah, it's part of his story. I've read quite a few of your. I have 2 of your short story collections that I got through Sub Press, and I love them. And quite a few of your novellas are quite metaphysical in nature. You talk a lot about religion.
Yeah.
I'm curious. We'll go into more on the religious side in a second. But do you have influences that come from like philosophical works? Where does that kind of come from? Or religious works as well?
Yes is the answer to that. Paradoxically, for a fairly devout Christian, I'm also an amazing, enormous fan of Nietzsche, the man who declared that God is dead. But on that point, I disagree with him. On everything else, I tend to agree. I don't really count Nietzsche as a philosopher, because he's just a very, very good prose writer.
Yeah.
And an amazingly intelligent mind. So a lot of what he says I don't agree with, but I love the way he says it. And I've been reading it since I was about 12 or 13. The character that comes across from his writing is of the friend you wish you had. He's been my friend Fred for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Trying to reconcile the world's most prominent atheist and my own religion is a difficult trick, but I've managed it over the years.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mentioned this to you in my email. Some of your books have quite a pessimistic view of religion, and that explains it. I can see where that comes from.
I've only written one book into which I put any of my own religious views, and that wasn't at the KJ Barker book. That's Tom Holt book.
Okay, which book was that?
The Management Style of the Supreme Beings,
cool.
which is my attempt at writing a Christian book. And I've done that. Don't have to do it again, so that's all right.
Yeah.
Generally, I don't put my opinions on anything into my writing.
Yeah.
I put my characters' opinions into, and my characters' opinions, although my characters come from me, I do not share their opinions, and they don't share mine. Yeah,
100%. Are there any other philosophers that influence you?
They made me read Plato when I was a kid, and what impressed me and what I learnt from was his writing style. So the 2 philosophers whose works I've read and which mean a great deal to me, I both like because they're the way they write, not what they say.
Yeah.
Which would infuriate both of them, no doubt, but that's their tough luck.
Exactly. I read a lot of Plato. I studied philosophy at university, so we had to read Plato, Aristotle. Unfortunately, we didn't do Nietzsche, but I agree with you. The writing style felt very, it just felt very kind of visceral in a way.
I read at school. I read Plato in Greek. You can't really get Plato in English because the way his mind works and everything on which his worldview is predicated only works in the Greek language.
Right.
It's it's the ability to take an abstract. Take a bunch of words, put the definite article in front of it, and turn it into a noun, which only Greek can do.
Yeah.
Which makes it possible to take abstract ideas like the theory of forms and make them real and make them real, because in Greek that's a noun, as opposed to a subordinate clause.
Right.
And that's get a bit. I think you can get a bit towards that in German.
Right.
Maybe that's why all the great philosophers are Greek and German.
I did Greek for 3 years. Never again. Never ever again. One of the things that you mentioned was that your personal view very rarely comes into your books. Your books are quite nihilistic. They're quite, I mean, again, going back to Nietzsche, it makes sense. What's your perspective on society today? I'm curious whether you think we're as screwed as the characters are in your books, kind of more broadly. If you don't want to get too political, totally understand. I'm just curious.
I can't remember who said it, but someone was asked what is your view of Western civilization, and he replied it would be quite a good idea, and I think that puts it.
Sums it up. Yeah, I agree. Let's just keep it there.
A lot of my books are about war. I would say about 90% are pacifist. As I see it, the way I see it, I write about. I've studied war all my life in the same way as a doctor studies a disease. Yeah. You can't cure it unless you study it.
Right.
And I've studied it in great detail, and I think and I can't think of anything more terrible than war.
Yeah, I agree.
But I said that doesn't stop me writing about it. It makes me want to write about it.
Another thing that you talk a lot about, at least in The Hammer, which was one of my favourite books, is family dynamics. There's one bit in that book, and I don't want to say it on camera in case it spoils it for other people who want to read it, but there's one part in that book where we get a reveal of what happens to the daughter. I won't say anything more beyond that. And that's one of those moments where I had to put the book down, go for a walk, because I realised how horrific the situation was. I'm curious, where did your kind of perspective of how those family dynamics would play out came from? Does that come from, hopefully not from your own experiences, because it was so kind of intense, but has that come from other?
That's a good question, because I have no brothers or sisters. My own childhood was extremely. My own family couldn't have asked for better parents.
Yeah.
I pride myself. I have a certain degree of insight into human nature just through observation, and I've observed a lot of families, and I think I know how they work.
Yeah.
And if you push that to right to extremes, I think that's how such things would happen.
Yeah, I agree.
In literary terms, there is no better mechanism than a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
Because into a dysfunctional family you can get everything that you might want to write about.
It's a mixture of a drama just mixed in with some really, really intensely messed up individuals.
Yeah. Trying
to do the right thing, I think, but not necessarily getting there.
I wrote a novella about I don't think I've placed that one yet, so I can. It was based on the Benson family.
Okay.
Benson and his brothers, who weird as a blender full of ferrets, the Bensons were.
Yeah.
You had three very weird brothers and a very weird sister, and a very weird mother and a very weird father.
Right.
And I thought, how would it be if this was the family of the Messiah?
Interesting.
So the father is genuinely the promised one,
right?
And his son has to grow up with strange women coming up to him when he's in the schoolyard with his mates and washing his feet. How would you grow up if you were like that? And that was a nice story to write.
I can't wait to get to that one because I haven't read it yet.
I don't think anybody wanted that one yet. I may have sold it in China. A couple of my short stories only exist in Chinese, not through choice. Nobody wanted them in England or America, but the Chinese liked them.
You have one person here at least. When you're going back to the writing process a little, we talked a little bit how the Peter Jackson books kind of made certain parts of the world feel very realistic. Are there any other mediums that you also pull from, like theatre, music?
All the time. From all sorts of a very wide range of influences. 3 or 4 of my characters come directly from Star Trek, for example.
Really?
But with a thorough process of finding off the serial numbers first.
Right.
Generally, when I get an influence, it's a shape or mechanism. Generally speaking, a mechanism of how a character works, which is very good, because then you can plagiarise like mad. No one ever knows you've done it.
Yeah, no one knows exactly. Yeah. Okay. What about music? At all?
Not particularly, I don't think. I mentioned Wagner, who is Wagner's my favourite dramatist.
Yeah.
The structure and the complexity that he gets into the Ring Cycle is it's equal with Shakespeare and in my opinion greater than anything Shakespeare ever did, because Shakespeare never wrote anything on that scale.
Yeah.
My favourite composers are Wagner and Gilbert and Sullivan, which pretty much covers the entire spectrum. You have something for every day.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on your mood. You've obviously written a lot of books. I'm curious, for me at least, when I first started reading your books, it was really hard for me to find your books just online, like especially your backlist. The older books that you've written. I mean, obviously your newer books are a lot more easier to find on Amazon, Waterstones, etc. Do you think they'll ever get reprinted?
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Be nice if they were. Looking back on them, I certainly wouldn't want to write those books now. I hope I'll be able to, or if I did, I hope I'd be able to do a better job.
Right.
But a lot, to be honest with you, a lot about them I've forgotten simply because I only ever read them once, so I never read the proofs.
Really? That's really interesting. I'm assuming you still have the characters in the back of your mind.
Well, vaguely, but
yeah.
I have to think twice before I remember who they are.
Yeah, fair enough. I have to ask, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine. Will we ever get another Basso book or another Knesset book?
I don't think so, because their stories are complete, and I don't know where you would fit it in. I mean, yes, you could have one about what Knesset did in the war, but as a novella. But I don't, not a full length book.
Okay.
That's why the stories in the standalones were only enough story for a book. And that's why I did them as such.
So you have an idea that Korax is going to be a trilogy even before you start writing?
Originally, the idea I had for him was, wouldn't it be fun to write a series of books about somebody who made his living scavenging from battlefields? Yeah. And that lasted. That only lasted until I'd written the opening to that book and realised that I'd said pretty much everything there was to say about scavenging from battlefields without being boring.
Yeah.
Whereupon I had to think, but by that stage, I'd grown to know who he was, and so I knew there was a much longer story to tell about him.
Yeah.
And that was fine.
Yeah.
A book or a series of books can only be as long as the character makes it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's to your point around the context around that character. If it makes sense to have 3 books following that character, then it makes sense. Yeah, completely. Following on from what I was saying about the backlist of your older books, you don't have that many audiobooks, but I feel like that's a really missed opportunity, because these books I feel like are meant to be heard and dramatised in a way.
They started. I think the first ones they did were the Siege series.
Right. Yeah. The new ones.
And they were read by a chap called Ray Sawyer, who'd read all the Tom Holt books for me, and whose voice I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
He's marvellous. He's given up now, so unfortunately he won't be able to read any more of them. Yeah. I love audiobooks myself. One thing I loved about Ray Sawyer's reading was he put in put in things that I won't say they weren't there. Just I didn't put them there. She barks a lot.
Actually, on the topic of animals and pets, you don't have any animal or pet companions, at least in the books that I've read. Is there?
No, I'm afraid I have a harmless view of livestock. It's marvellous stuff to have. You take very good care of it. It's there for a purpose.
Yeah.
She's not there for a purpose.
Yeah.
But,
she's there to bark away.
I'm not very sentimental about animals.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Going back to my point around your books being very kind of vivid, if somebody were to come to you and say, hey, we should make a full life into an HBO show like Game of Thrones.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
I'll start petitioning.
Last year, after 10 years in development, I got to see a film of one of my Tom Holt books, which
oh, very cool.
The Portable Door.
Okay.
Which I think it was originally intended to be a cinema release. It's now going to be released on streaming. They made an absolutely wonderful job, but it's a brilliant movie. It bears virtually no relation at all to anything I've read. It's much better than the book.
Interesting.
But I'm delighted that they've done it, because I feel it's a vindication of my decision all those years ago to pack in my proper job and turn to writing.
Yeah.
I think that there's no other vindication for a writer beyond people liking what you write.
Would you ever want to go into screenwriting? I mean, there's quite a lot of authors who do that kind of as a side kind of project.
I've tried it, found that I couldn't do it to save my life, and decided not to waste any more time with it. It's a totally different skill from writing prose.
Yeah.
And beyond me, too difficult for me.
Interesting. Okay. And one question that I have on your kind of two different authorial voices that you have, how do you kind of flip between them? Do you have a kind of specific KJ Parker hat that you wear and then a Tom Holt hat? Like, how do you differentiate, what's going to become a Tom Holt story versus what's going to become a Parker story?
Differentiating is not a problem because they are very different.
Very different. Yeah.
KJ Parker is much easier to write.
Yeah.
I can tell more interesting stories.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is nice just to be purely funny from time to time. Recently, more people wanted to read Tom Holt than wanted to read KJ Parker.
Is Tom Holt books more popular than KJ Parker books?
I think that stopped being the case when with the Siege books. Up till then, yes.
Interesting. Because I have a few of your Tom Holt books. I haven't read them yet because I've just been making my way through the KJ Parker one.
The Tom Holt books were my living, such as it was for over 20 odd years. Yeah. Enough people liked them to mean that I didn't have to go out to work anymore.
Yeah.
Which was fine. So long as there are people who want to read them, I'll be delighted to write them.
Yeah.
But writing the KJ Parker books is easier and more fun.
Where did the name KJ Parker come from?
I decided I had to have a pen name.
Yeah.
Parker is a pen name.
Yeah.
And the KJs were the initials of a friend of mine who taught me everything I know about engineering.
That's lovely. That's so nice. And then Parker?
Parker Pen.
Parker. I love it. Okay, that makes sense. A few more questions, because I'm so grateful for your time, honestly. It's just been an absolute joy learning more about your process and just speaking to you, because I'm such a fan of your books. I love them. What is it about writing that you love? Because obviously it comes across in your books. You must love writing. You've mentioned it yourself. What is it about that experience that you love so much?
The thing I love most about writing is getting paid for it. It's a way of earning a living which is more congenial than any other I've come across. I vastly prefer having written to actually writing because I'm really nervous and on edge until the thing is finished and it's worked. Having written is a wonderful feeling because there it is, and I got away with it, and it's okay.
Yeah.
The writing process itself is very hard work. It requires total concentration. It's something I have to do rather than something that I choose to do.
Interesting. Okay.
The analogy that I find most helpful is that of a war correspondent. that I am cut that my purpose in life is to cover the story for the folks back home. Where back home is, I have no idea. Who the folks are, I guess it's my readers. It is the need to be an independent observer writing about the story.
And then my final question, we have the Saviour's Corax series coming up at the end of this year. Is there anything else that you can tell us that you're working on? If not, again, no worries. I don't want to get you in trouble with your editor.
At the moment, I'm writing on. I'm halfway through the second book of another series.
Okay.
Whether this series will see light today, I don't know, because my editor hasn't read the first book yet. It's on his to-read pile.
Okay.
This book has strong magical elements in it.
Oh,
and a protagonist who doesn't believe in magic. The books are about saints and demons,
okay.
and the heroes and atheists. It makes it a bit difficult for him when he's surrounded by the forces of evil, and making walking up to him and saying, "We are the forces of evil." But his determination not to believe is one of the things that drives him.
Is it first person narrative as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I vowed I would never do such things. The first book is basically our hero versus the undead.
Okay.
The second book is our hero versus demonic possession. The third book, I haven't made my mind up yet. It'll be some other staple of fantasy that I swore I'd never touch with a 10-foot pole.
I can't wait to see it. I hope it comes out. I really can't wait to read it because it sounds wonderful. One other question that I have, actually, sorry, as you were talking, it reminded me. The current kind of, at least the 4 standalones that we have, and then I think some of the other series, they're all set in the same world. Was that intentional, or was there kind of this idea to connect them all?
It started. Then I didn't start off with a map in my mind.
Right.
Gradually, the map has filled itself in. A little point I'm trying to make about history in the inconsistencies of this world. It's full of inconsistencies. Countries move about.
Yeah.
As an amateur historian, I realised that there's nothing more changeable than history.
Yeah.
It changes every few years as a new opinion, a new view, or new desires to interpret comes in. So the history of my invented world is constantly changing, just as it does in the real world.
Yeah.
I rationalise this to my readers by saying that these are unreliable histories. They're written for people with agendas, by people with agendas, and quite frequently they aren't true.
Yeah.
That's part of the texture of the book. That any work of history is going to be unreliable because the circumstances in which it's written and the circumstances in which it's read.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's how it is today.
Yeah.
Any piece of history is written by the victor mostly, and their perception of that event is going to be very different from the person who's on the receiving end of it.
One thing I want to do one day is write a book with translators' footnotes all the way through. The idea that I would like to sell to the reader is that this is a translation, and there are certain phrases that are untranslatable, and this is our guess at what this means, but it doesn't. But
I love that. Amazing. Well, I think let's stop there because I've really taken up lots of your time. Seriously, Tom, thank you so much
for pleasure.
Writing incredible books that have honestly changed my life. Genuinely, they've changed my perception of what is good writing, good character work. And your books are some of my favourite books that I've ever read. So thank you so much. And thank you for your time. There's going to be a lot of people that are very excited to watch this. There's this kind of who's Tom Holt, who's KJ Parker. So I really hope that everybody enjoys this at home and kind of get a sense of who you are, the man behind the pen, so to speak. So thank you, and I hope we can do this again sometime in the future again.
Delighted.
And I can't wait to continue reading your books.
Well, I'll send you the other 2 parts of the site.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As you're supposed to these days, go out and try and get people to interact with me. Mostly because I don't. I can't imagine many people would want to. I don't. I don't have a very interesting life.
You're such an interesting person.
Nice of you to say so. But the things I do are not the sort of things that my readers would be interested in. Because what do I do? I go and feed the cows. I split the firewood. I dig ditches and I make things at the forge. I can't imagine anybody being interested in what I do.
Yeah, it's really interesting because quite a lot of your books go into a lot of detail about process and how things are made, and those are some of my favourite parts.
They're some of my favourite parts too.
Yeah.
That which is why I stopped doing it. Because, I thought that probably the only person who's really enjoying this bit is me.
Yeah.
So
we have at least one other person. I know there's a few others that do really appreciate that level of detail, because I feel like, especially in a lot of fantasy, I read a lot of fantasy, and you get a lot of like world building, and that's great, but you never really go into the nitty gritty. And I love learning. I'm very curious, and so when I read your books, they feed an element of curiosity that I don't get from any other book, because sometimes it almost feels like you're reading a manual, but like in a really satisfying way. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's set in this broader world with these characters that I personally, connect with in some way or another. So having these little bits of, world building that are very, very detailed, it just adds another layer. But I hope you bring them back.
I don't know what I like to do, because I like doing all my own stunts, as it were. And I learned to make armour, so I could write about making armour. I learned blacksmithing so I could write about it. But having done so, I found there are things that I find really, really satisfying to do.
Yeah. How did you learn to blacksmith?
I have a friend who was one of the best blacksmiths in the country, lives just down the road, and he very kindly taught me the rudiments of the craft.
What did you make in your forge?
Small things mostly. Bill hooks, knives, small farm tools mostly. Because they got the. Oh yeah.
That's wonderful.
I've made any gods of all sorts. But that was when I was able to use my friend's forge up the road. He has full work. My little forge, it's just really getting enough heat to do anything.
Yeah, it wouldn't be enough. And another question I have, sorry, I'm now remembering all these other questions from your books. Fencing obviously comes up quite a lot. It's one of the central parts of crafts, which I really enjoy. Yeah. And also one of the only few multi-POV stories that you did, which is interesting. Did you fence yourself, or is fencing something you personally like?
I learned fencing so as to write about it, but I've been reading about the precursors or ancestors of fencing for many years. Okay. And so it was. I find 15th and 16th century fencing a much more interesting thing than modern Olympic sport. For one thing, it makes marvellous metaphors of whether you fight in a straight line or a circle, for example, and the timing of it. Somebody described violence as just another form of communication, and that's a very good thing to say to a writer. It's a way in which one of the primary ways in which my characters communicate with each other, but it is still communication of a sort.
Yeah, and then on the multi-POV piece, of the books that I read, that's the only multi-POV story that I consume. How did you decide to do that one multi-POV, and why is that not something that you've done more of in your other books, or at least in your older ones?
Because the characters were a team, there couldn't be one more prominent than the others. The Two of Swords started off as a relay race, where the point of view passes from character to character with each segment. Right. This I didn't actually keep it up to the end because two characters basically took the book over and wouldn't allow me to write about anybody else. So in the third part, but it's just down to the two of them. Okay. But it was great fun writing a huge panoramic story with a different point of view actually for each chapter.
Right. I love that, actually. One of my other favourite authors, I don't know if you've come across him here in his newest trilogy that he wrote, he does this wonderfully. Now, I really want to read Two of Swords because he bounces from a main character POV and then he'll shift to some random person who's involved in the chapter or in the scene in some way. And then we get a very different perspective from what we're typically used to.
Yeah.
And it's just such an interesting way to provide like a 360 view of the world and give a bit more kind of flavour to it. Yeah.
It's as a mechanism, it's very good indeed.
Yeah.
I would like to do it with 3 or 4 first-person narrators, all telling the same story.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying at my old age. So.
Oh, can't wait for that. Can't wait for that. Okay, amazing. I think that's it, Tom. Thank you again for everything. Honestly,
My pleasure.
It's been a delight, and I just can't wait to see more of what you write.
And there we have it. There is the end of my interview with Tom Holt, aka KJ Parker. I really hope you enjoyed this interview. It was an absolute honour and pleasure to meet Tom. I still can't stop smiling about it because I just had such a lovely time with him, and I'm really excited to get the opportunity to interview him again. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next interview, folks. Stay safe, as always, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.